Hi, for this assignment, I chose to do it over the movie Just Mercy. And it's based on a true story following Brian Stevenson, who is played by Michael B. Jordan. And in the movie, which is also based on a true story, he's a lawyer working to defend people on death row. So the main person in this case is Walter McMillan. Um, He's convicted of murder, even though there's a lot of evidence that suggests he didn't actually do it. So overall, the movie basically shows his fight to try and prove his innocence and get justice in a system that is ultimately working against him. And so in the movie, the police investigation is shown as pretty biased and rushed. And Walter is ultimately arrested, mainly based on one witness statement instead of strong physical evidence at the time. So a lot of other information that doesn't support the case against him is ignored and kind of put on the back burner. And it just shows how once police think they have their suspect, they stick with that idea even if things fully don't add up, because most of the time they would rather put someone in jail and kind of be not be done with it, but in a sense kind of put that aside and move on to the next. So this connects to what we learned about police discretion, and how decisions that are made early in a case can really impact everything later on and ultimately the outcome. It also shows how bias and lack of thorough investigation can ultimately lead to wrongful convictions, and the innocent are found guilty even though they're innocent. So and that leads to the court. The court system in the movie really highlights inequality in the justice process. Walter doesn't have strong legal representation at first, which ends up putting him at a disadvantage. The prosecution pushes for hard conviction even though the evidence is weak and questionable. There also seems to be racial bias affecting how seriously his defense is taken. So he ends up getting sentenced to death pretty quickly, which ultimately, it shows how extreme outcomes can happen when fairness isn't fully there. So for him ultimately get the death penalty without a lot of substantial evidence just kind of shows our cracks in the justice system. And so it connects to what we learned about how courts are supposed to be neutral, but in reality, things like race, money, and representation can influence the outcome. And it also just kind of shows how important due process is, because without it, innocent people can be seriously harmed, and it ends up ruining their lives. So the corrections part of the movie is shown through Walter being on death row. The environment is very isolating. He basically is waiting years for something that could change his life or end it. It shows how stressful and mentally draining that kind of uncertainty can be, especially when you know you're innocent and you're being charged with something that 100% you didn't do. So he doesn't really have normal human connection or support at the times, which honestly makes it even more intense because he's isolated. The movie also shows how prison conditions can affect mental health, especially in those high security settings when they don't get interaction and are in isolation. So this connects to what we learned about corrections and how prisons are not just punishment, but also impact people's emotional and mental or psychological well-being because of how they're treated in there, the interactions they have, the time alone. It honestly just takes a toll on them physically and emotionally. So overall, the movie really shows how the justice system can fail when bias, lack of evidence, and inequality play a role. And it connects all three parts of the system: police, courts, and corrections. And kind of shows how they all impact each other and how they all kind of affect one another, in a sense. And so a mistake or an unfair decision in one stage can completely change someone's life. And so it's not to be taken lightly. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is how important fairness, proper investigation, and strong legal representation are. I don't think that just because someone might be less fortunate economically, they shouldn't have a right to a lawyer that may not know what they're doing and kind of is just trying to get them maybe a deal, a plea deal, even though they're not guilty. So it also made me think about how these aren't just cases, they're like real people's lives and families who are affected by the system. And I personally do not have a family member that is or has been incarcerated. But just like seeing all the stories and watching this movie and a couple others and knowing people who have been affected by incarceration and the legal system having cracks overall, just kind of put in perspective how important a fair trial is, and it kind of made me rethink what exactly that means and what exactly goes into it. And so looking through all of this, I'm able to see how this story, not story, but how this event and movie connects to what we're learning in class about the legal system.